What's up guys, Jeff from Sorta Healthy here. In today's video, we're continuing to crush the NASM exam. What we'll specifically cover today are exam question scenarios where 3 answers are wrong and 1 is right. What makes those 3 answers wrong and that other one correct? I'm going to break all of that down for you in a simple, easy to follow way, so that way you can do the same thing yourself on the actual test. We'll also cover some really helpful study strategies, one of which you're seeing on the screen right now. This is Pocket Prep, a very useful study application, and we'll be talking more about that later. Before getting to the good stuff, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, because both of those things really do help to support us, and this channel is a free resource for all fitness professionals. Thank you so much for that support, guys. I really appreciate it. On to the video. So before getting into our trivia today, you should probably have already gotten through step 1 and 2 on this list. That means you've read and skimmed a bunch of NASM chapters, you've taken notes, and done the practice quizzes along the way. Next, you'd want to review the part 1 and part 2 videos on passing the NASM exam. These break down the concepts most likely to appear on the final test in an easy to follow way. Watch both of these guys a few times, they're going to help you out a lot. Obviously, knowing the subject material is huge, but you still need to be able to answer questions correctly, and NASM loves to throw some tricky, weirdly worded questions at you guys. Luckily, that's where trivia or practice scenarios like we're going over today really help out. So without further ado, you're training an experienced client and they're doing overhead press and bench press. Where do you spot these moves? A, the elbow for both, B, the wrist for both, C, the elbow for bench press and the wrist for overhead press, or D, the wrist for bench press and the elbow for overhead press. Take a few seconds to think about this one, and again, this pertains to you, the personal trainer, and where you're going to put your hands as you're spotting the bench press and the overhead press. I always find this answer to be a little bit weird, but the correct answer here is B, the wrist for both. So that means when a client is doing an overhead press or a bench press, you are spotting at their wrist. So if someone is bench pressing or overhead pressing, I think it's important to think of where my hands would be the most effective to help if the client was starting to fail or lose form. It's tempting to choose an answer with the elbow in it, but if you think about kind of boosting somebody's elbow up, whether they're bench pressing or overhead pressing, it's really just not going to be too stable as you're doing that. So yeah, the wrist is the best answer for both. So your client is doing a torso rotation and contracting their rectus abdominis for increased stability. What are they doing? Are they A, bracing, B, drawing in, C, doing an eccentric contraction, or D, an isometric contraction? And while you guys are thinking about that, we can see Alexis doing a torso rotation down here. So this is the starting position, and she's kind of just squeezing her abs tight as she is rotating to her left right here. So if your client is doing a torso rotation and contracting their rectus abdominis for increased stability, they are A, bracing. And you're almost certainly going to get a bracing versus drawing in question on the big test, so let's go over how you're going to get that question right. So bracing is contracting the global abdominals such as the rectus abdominis and obliques at the same time. So again, bracing has to do with global abdominals like the rectus abdominis and the obliques. Drawing in is similar, but it's about the local core muscles. Really, it's about transverse abdominis, that deepest core muscle. It's more about kind of pulling your core in or kind of pulling that belly button or navel in towards the spine. So considering we're talking about a global core muscle here, the rectus abdominis, yeah, we already know the correct answer here is most likely A, bracing. We can also rule out B because again, it's rectus abdominis, not transverse abdominis. Transverse abdominis has to do with drawing in. We know the answer is an isometric. This movement right here is not isometric. You're not just holding a position like you would be in a plank or something like that. And sure, there is an eccentric component to this move, but again, that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is bracing. Eccentric things are just when the muscles are lengthening, like that kind of going down portion of the bench press. The client's gastrocnemius and soleus are very tight, and that limits their ability to plantar flex, and plantar flex is kind of like when you're pushing your toes down, basically doing a calf raise. What is happening? Is the answer A, reciprocal inhibition, B, altered length tension relationship, C, autogenic inhibition, or D, progressive overload? And again, we're talking about the gastrocnemius and soleus, and those two muscles are here on the back side of your calf. So which of these things right here is going to limit your ability to plantar flex or essentially do a calf raise? The best answer here is B, the altered length tension relationship. So an altered length tension relationship occurs when a muscle's resting length is too long or too short, and that can reduce the amount of force it can produce. So if we simply know that definition, or roughly what it is, it's pretty easy to figure out that B is the best answer here. So progressive overload is basically when you make exercise harder over time and the muscle has to adapt and grow stronger and bigger to kind of accommodate those exercise changes over time. So that is definitely not the right answer here. Autogenic inhibition is essentially what happens when you are foam rolling or something like that and you're kind of holding a tight spot for 30 seconds, which you should do. And essentially as you're doing that foam rolling, that muscle is going to calm down. And again, that is due to autogenic inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition is essentially when muscles are active on one side of the body and then the muscles kind of have to shut off on the opposite side of the body. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, my biceps are doing the work and my triceps are reciprocally inhibited. If I'm doing a calf raise using muscles on the back side of my calf to push my body up, well then the muscles on the front side of my calf, my tibialis muscles, those are going to be reciprocally inhibited. But again, they don't really have a whole lot to do with this question right here. Moving right along, your client is running outside on a trail with uneven terrain. What type of balance best describes this situation? Is it A, semi-dynamic balance, B, dynamic balance, C, static balance, or D, sensorimotor function? And this is just something that we didn't cover in that part 1 or part 2 video, so I figured it was good for us to go over it now. So if your client is running outside on a trail with uneven terrain, the type of balance that best describes their situation would be B, dynamic balance. So static balance is the ability to maintain the center of mass within the base of support in a stationary position, that being the key point here, meaning no linear or angular movement. Semi-dynamic balance would be something like a wobble board. Someone is trying to maintain balance while their base of support is moving. B, dynamic balance is the best answer here because dynamic balance is when you're trying to maintain balance over an ever-changing surface. So if I'm running on uneven terrain, that terrain is kind of constantly changing. So because it's constantly changing, dynamic balance is the best answer. Sensorimotor function is the integration of sensory information and motor responses that allow people to interact with their environment. Obviously that is relevant to this question, but the question does ask what type of balance best describes the situation. So yeah, B is still the best answer. So your client is doing a biceps curl. What type of lever is this movement? Would it be A, first class lever, B, a second class lever, C, a third class lever, or D, a fourth class lever? And on the big test, you're likely to get maybe like one question about this, so we are not going to go into a lot of detail on this one because again, it's just not something you really need to know that well. So if your client is doing a biceps curl, the type of lever that movement would be C, a third class lever. And third class levers are where the effort is between the resistance and the fulcrum. And I really don't want to break this down any further, guys, because you're likely to get like one question about this. So just remember, third class levers are levers where the effort is between the resistance and the fulcrum. Most examples in the human body are third class levers, biceps curls, hamstring curls, things like that. Third class levers. Shoveling, tongs, rowing, also third class levers. First class levers are the most basic type of lever and the least common in the human body. Neck extensions, tricep extensions, dips, throwing, things like that would be first class levers. And these guys are set up like a seesaw with the fulcrum, and the fulcrum is essentially a pivot point, so my elbow in the bicep curl will be the fulcrum between the effort and the load. Second class levers in the human body are also fairly rare. In a second class lever, the resistance lies between the fulcrum and the force, such as in a wheelbarrow. So things like calf raises or push-ups or even a long jump would be considered second class levers. Just know that a biceps curl is a third class lever, and those are the most common in the human body. Your client is running on a treadmill and you are doing the talk test. At what point are they hitting VT1 or ventilatory threshold 1? Would it be A, when they can only speak 5 to 10 words, B, they can only answer in one-word responses such as no, C, they're at an RPE, rating of perceived exertion, of 16 on the Borg scale, or D, they're at an RPE of 7 on the Borg scale. So you're talking with your client, doing the talk test as they're running on a treadmill. At what point are they hitting VT1? And this is one of those questions that does just require some memorization on your part. That being said, there are some answers here that we can pretty much rule out right away. So the best answer here is A, when they can only speak 5 to 10 words. So ventilatory threshold 1 is the point at which the body uses an equal mixture of carbohydrates and fats as fuel sources. When running on a treadmill, you know a client is at that point, or VT1, when talking first becomes difficult. And having that information allows us to rule out D and C here, because an RPE of 7 is basically like you're doing nothing. That's a super easy thing. And an RP of 16 on that 6 to 20 scale is pretty damn hard. So they're definitely not at an RP of 16 or an RP of 7. We can also rule out B here because if someone can only respond with single word responses such as no, they're working really hard, and VT1 is just when things start to become challenging, so 5 to 10 words would be about right. So your client is rising up from the bottom of a squat. What muscle or muscles contribute the most to this movement, and what is the correct type of contraction? So again, your client is rising up from the bottom part of a squat, so you have to think about what muscle actions are taking place there, and then you can kind of think about what muscles are doing the most work. So the best answer to this question would be C, the quads and a concentric contraction. So as your client is squatting up, I want you to think about concentric contractions happening, and as your client is squatting down, muscle lengthening is occurring, so eccentric contractions are happening primarily on the way down. And that's really helpful because that allows us to rule out D and B here, which of course the glutes are super important when it comes to squatting as well. The hamstrings do a little bit, so we do need to rule these two answers out, and to do that, you do need to know what's happening as your client is coming out of the bottom of a squat. So again, we know it's concentric up out of the bottom of the squat, so we can limit it down to A and C, and the quads do a heck of a lot more than soleus when it comes to the squatting movement. So yeah, C, the quads in a concentric contraction, that is the best answer here. If we were talking about the lowering portion of a squat, then B would be the best answer, but again, we're talking about the way up. So your client has lower cross syndrome or anterior pelvic tilt. What is most likely to impact them when running? A, their overactive hip flexors cause a lack of hip extension. B, their overactive hip extensors cause a lack of hip flexion. C, their overactive core muscles cause low back pain, or D, their underactive low back muscles which are too loose. D was just kind of weirdly worded there, but yeah, you can definitely tell that one of these answers is actually the best. Of course, this question does require you to know what lower cross syndrome or anterior pelvic tilt is. And then once you know what lower cross syndrome or anterior pelvic tilt is, you pretty much then just have to think about what is overactive and what is underactive, and that easily allows you to figure out this question. So if your client has lower cross syndrome, what is most likely to impact them when running? It would be A, their overactive hip flexors, and that would cause a lack of hip extension. So if you get a question like this, the best thing that you can do is just go through each one of the answers and see if the overactive and underactive muscles actually kind of line up with what you're looking for. So if we're looking at D, their underactive low back muscles are too loose. That would not be what is actually happening here. Their low back muscles would be overactive and they would be too tight. So we can rule out answer D right away. Their overactive core muscles cause low back pain. It's the opposite. So their core muscles would be underactive, which could potentially cause some low back pain, but again, this is incorrect, so we know C is also not the correct answer. B, their overactive hip extensors cause a lack of hip flexion. So in lower cross syndrome or anterior pelvic tilt, this is the opposite of what is true. Hip extensors, so glutes, hamstrings, things like that, that extend that hip backwards, yeah, they are underactive, so we can rule out answer B as well. And again, if you know what lower cross syndrome is, then you would know the hip flexors are overactive, so this answer should pretty much catch your eye right away, and then of course you have to make sure the rest of it is correct. So their overactive hip flexors would cause a lack of hip extension. Yeah, that makes sense, and that is what happens in lower cross syndrome. So your 43-year-old male client is at a heart rate of 139. What percentage of their estimated heart rate max are they at? And you are likely to get maybe 1 or 2 questions about heart rate max on your final test, so it's good for us to go over this sort of thing right now. And by the way, guys, you will have access to a calculator. It's going to be a dinky little kind of built-in calculator, kind of like what I'm showing you on the screen right now. But yes, you will have access to a calculator like this on the test if you do get a question like this one. Okay, so your 43-year-old male client is at a heart rate of 139. What percentage of their estimated heart rate max are they at? It is B, about 79%. So they are 43 years old, so we go for 220, and we go minus their age, which is 43. And 177 would be their estimated heart rate max. From there we could just work backwards. So if we do 177 times 0.54, which is basically what we're looking at right here with answer A, 54% of this 43-year-old's heart rate max would be about 95 or 96, so it is not 139, which is the number that we're looking for. So again, if we have 177, which we've already determined is this person's max heart rate because we go 220 minus their age, 43, and then if we just multiplied that by 0.65, which we see down here in answer D, that is also not correct. It's not too close to the number that we're looking for. So 65% of this person's max heart rate, this 43-year-old, would be about 115, so also not the right answer. So again, 177, that is their max heart rate. 220 minus 43 is how we get that. And then if we look at B, so 177 times 0.79. Well, look at that. We got 139.83, so 139, 140. Obviously, it is the closest to this number right here. And yeah, we know that's the right answer. So 139, 140, it says about 79%. So that is the correct answer right here. And again, the most important thing to know in this question is to get someone's max heart rate, it is 220 minus their age. Doesn't matter whether the person is male or female, I just threw that in to kind of trick you guys. And then you can work backwards with percentages like this. 220 minus your age is the estimated max heart rate. So your client is doing this movement. Of course, we can see this movement right down here. It's a front raise. And what action is taking place and what plane of motion is this action taking place in? Is the best answer A, the movement is extension and it's taking place in the sagittal plane? B, the movement is flexion and it's taking place in the sagittal plane? C, the movement is extension and it's taking place in the frontal plane? D, the movement is flexion and it's taking place in the transverse plane. When I get a question like this, oftentimes I'm trying to figure out what plane of motion that movement takes place in first, because I actually think sometimes that's the easier thing to figure out. What plane of motion does that take place in? Again, if you watched part 1 and part 2 carefully, you should have been able to rule out answer C and answer D reasonably quickly, because answer D, transverse plane. So transverse plane motions are rotational. So essentially me doing a torso rotation, me doing an arm circle, anything that has a rotation component in it, that is happening in the transverse plane. There's no rotation going on here, so rule out answer D right away. Frontal plane movements happen to the right and the left side of the body, so this is happening up and down to the front side of the body. So yeah, we can rule out frontal plane here as well, so we can just say right off the bat, answer C is not correct. Sagittal plane movements go up and down into the front side and the back side of the body, so yeah, it's definitely a sagittal plane movement. We just have to figure out if it's flexion or extension. And I feel like shoulder flexion and hip flexion and extension are a little bit confusing. So really what I want you guys to think about, just to keep it as simple as possible, is shoulder flexion or hip flexion is moving forwards, and hip extension or shoulder extension, that's going backwards. So if this guy was moving his arm back behind his body, that would be shoulder extension. If he was moving his leg back behind his body, that would be hip extension. If he's kicking his leg forward, that is going to be hip flexion. And if he's moving his entire shoulder and arm forward like that, that is going to be shoulder flexion. So knowing that, we can definitely say answer B is the best answer to this question. So guys, we just went over 10 exam question scenarios. If you feel like going over those different trivia questions was helpful, you should definitely consider taking advantage of step 3 and 4 here. As far as step 4 goes, I have a video and guide combination that you can access on my site, sortahealthytrainered.com. This purchasable video and guide covers 50 questions, and they're very similar to the ones we went over today, as well as what's on the actual test. Of course, by breaking down 50 questions instead of 10, well, we'll just be able to cover a lot more ground. Just as we did today, in all 50 of these sample exam questions and scenarios, I'll be breaking down why some answers are right and others are wrong. As is typical with Sorta Healthy, I'll make it simple, but also go into a lot of detail on a ton of different things. I know for many of you that will be incredibly helpful and will make passing that final exam significantly easier. This 50 question video and guide will be $14.97 for the first 500 buyers, but I expect that to go pretty fast. If you've been looking for a way to support the channel, this is a great way to do it. Hey, you can always grab some merch if you want to as well. Another really helpful tool that we've talked about on this channel a good amount is Pocket Prep, which is shown here in step number 3. I've been using Pocket Prep for years. I recommended this app back when I didn't get anything for it. I just knew how well it worked to help people to pass, especially those who struggle with weirdly worded questions. When Pocket Prep reached out to me to sponsor this video, it felt like the perfect match. Just to give you guys a better idea of what you're getting with step number 3 or Pocket Prep, you're getting an up-to-date database of 1,000 questions that was created by industry experts. Every domain that NASM is going to test you on is here on the app. Recently I've been playing around with the level up feature and it's pretty cool. They've also recently added an exam feature which is very similar format-wise to the actual NASM test. In using this app to study, I want all of you to focus on 3 key things. First off, I want you to try to study for 20 minutes every day. You should do the question of the day every single day, and you should do a few quick 10-question quizzes as well. I don't care if you're on your couch with the TV on in the background or if you're on vacation. Pocket Prep is easy to use anywhere. I used it a lot last year on a cruise since I knew I'd be doing study guides for all of you this year. The second thing I want all of you to do is review why some answers are correct and others are wrong. If you get an answer wrong, Pocket Prep will tell you which one is correct, why it's correct, and why the other answers are wrong. The third thing I want you to do with Pocket Prep, this video and my previous 2 videos, are to try to understand the concepts instead of memorizing answers to specific questions. There are some things you do have to memorize, like rep counts and tempos in the OPT model. But most things aren't worth memorizing, just understanding, since you'll never be 100% sure what will actually show up on the test. NASM can hit you with so many different things. At the end of the day, Pocket Prep is an affordable option. I think using it for 3 months leading up to your exam at $16.99 a month is super reasonable and what most of you should do. By the way, using my link for Pocket Prep down below helps to support this channel at no extra cost to you. In recap, alongside these 2 free study videos, these 2 things should both be very strongly considered as well. Both are affordable, help you understand the material, and most importantly, prevent you from getting tricked by those weird NASM questions. If you guys have any questions about passing your NASM exam or anything else, make sure to leave those down below in the comments. I will respond to you. If you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel because it does really help us out and it allows me to keep making free content for all of you. Thanks for watching everyone, and until next time, stay sort of healthy.